Hi folks, I'm Brent Gotsch, Resource Educator and Certified Floodplain Manager with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Ulster County and the Ashokan Watershed Stream Management Program. I am also a member of the Board of Directors for the New York State Floodplain and Stormwater Managers Association. Today we're going to learn about some floodplain management regulations and standards that are specific to New York State. United States, the federal government, through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA as it's commonly abbreviated, sets minimum regulations that each community must follow if they want to be in good standing with the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP as it's usually shortened to. These standards often relate to specific building standards for new and substantially improved construction, as well as limits on where in a mapped floodplain one can build. The reason these regulations exist is to protect both human life and property from flood damage. Some states and localities go above and beyond these minimum regulations, which make things even safer for everyone in the community. Today we're going to discuss several regulations that New York State requires when it comes to floodplain management. Keep in mind that localities can be stricter than these standards, so speak with your local building department before you start a project. The first New York State specific standard that we'll discuss is the state's requirement for 2 feet of freeboard. Freeboard is defined as an extra level of elevation above the base flood elevation, or BFE. BFE is the elevation to which floodwaters are expected to rise during the 1% annual chance flood, better known as the 100-year flood. These elevations are calculated in feet above sea level. Federal regulations state that new and substantially improved construction in mapped floodplains should be elevated to the base flood elevation. New York State requires new and substantially improved construction to be elevated at least 2 feet above base flood elevation. This provides an extra level of protection against floodwaters as they rise. It also provides a reduction in NFIP flood insurance premiums. However, the NFIP flood insurance is currently going through a major change where BFE is no longer the dominant variable in calculating flood insurance. New York State has special rules for mobile homes or manufactured homes as they're more commonly called today. If a mobile or manufactured home is to be located in a mapped floodplain, they also require 2 feet of freeboard, just like a traditionally constructed home would need. However, the freeboard standard is measured to the lowest part of the structural steel, not the lowest floor as it normally is in other parts of the country. This helps provide an additional level of protection for the structure. The Special Flood Hazard Area, or 100-year floodplain, is divided up into several areas. The flood fringe, as the name suggests, is located on the outer periphery of the floodplain. Located more towards the center, often hugging the stream channel, is what is known as the floodway. Floodways are highly regulated areas because they are often the deepest, swiftest moving, and most dangerous part of the flood flow. In order to build new construction in a floodway, you need to have an engineering analysis performed by a professional engineer that determines that there will be no rise in elevation of the floodwaters because of new construction. Typically, no rise is calculated to the nearest 1/100th of a foot, meaning that the engineering analysis would need to show 0.00, or 2 decimal places, before construction could be permitted. Although this is done in practice in many places, New York State has codified this in their regulations to ensure that this important regulation is followed. In coastal areas of the state, storm surge and wave run-up from coastal storms, such as hurricanes and nor'easters, can be a big concern and account for truly destructive flood damages. While not mandated by federal regulations, it's been recommended that states with coastal areas adopt the limit of moderate wave action, or LMWA. LMWA refers to coastal areas that see wave heights between 1.5 to 3 feet during a 1% annual chance flood. Most coastline floodplains have what is known as a coastal high hazard area, similar to a floodway in a riverine system in coastal A zone, which is similar to a flood fringe in a riverine system. Having a limwa helps to delineate between the coastal A zone and more inland flood zones, such as a regular A or AE zone. This helps with ensuring that proper construction regulations are followed. New York State has adopted a limwa for its coastal flood zones. FEMA standards allow for subgrade crawl spaces to be built in floodplains. For a time, New York State did not allow subgrade crawl spaces to be built in floodplains. However, under the current building code, it is allowed. Subgrade crawl spaces can be problematic in floodplains because plumbing, HVAC, and other machinery that services the building can be more easily damaged. However, most local municipalities have regulations on their books that disallow the use of subgrade crawl spaces. If you're in a jurisdiction that allows for subgrade crawl spaces, think long and hard before you construct them for your structure in the floodplain. In riverine floodplains, there are two main types of flood zones, AE zones and A zones. AE zones are sometimes referred to as detailed zones because they have base flood elevations calculated for them and with a clearly delineated floodway and flood fringe on the flood insurance rate map. A zones are sometimes referred to as unnumbered A zones or approximate A zones because they do not have base flood elevations calculated for them and do not have a delineated floodway or flood fringe. They are made using approximate methods that show only roughly where the extent of floodwaters are expected to inundate. Because base flood elevations are not established for these areas, FEMA has allowed those who wish to build in A zones the option of putting their first floor 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade on their property. While this offers some protection, it's usually not accurate enough compared to knowing what a true base flood elevation would be for that location. Because of this, New York State does not allow this method in A zones. Instead, a base flood elevation would have to be taken from a reputable source or developed by a qualified professional at the property owner's expense. Reputable sources include those created by professional engineers, usually for stream crossing projects. If a property owner is lucky enough to be near a public stream crossing, such as a bridge or culvert, they could probably get the BFE from the municipality or agency that constructed that project. If none of these exist, a property owner would otherwise have to hire a professional engineer or surveyor to develop one for their location. This can often be expensive and time-consuming to do. Luckily, in many parts of New York State that have newer digital flood insurance rate maps, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Floodplain Management Bureau can often provide property owners in A zones with a base flood elevation for floodplain construction purposes. If you're looking to do a construction project in an approximate A zone in New York State, reach out to the New York State DEC about getting an advisory base flood elevation before you start your project. Today we learned about how New York State goes above and beyond in several areas of floodplain management. This included having 2 feet of freeboard for new and substantially improved construction, special rules for mobile homes, codifying the definition of floodways, adopting limwas in coastal areas, subgrade crawl space allowances, and not allowing for 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade to act as a pseudo BFE in A zones. We hope that by watching this video, you have a better understanding of floodplain management regulations in New York State. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.